Performances were. And again, it says the reports would be shared with the Housing Improvement Board. Would it be possible for that's at the end of this paragraph, could the reports possibly be shared with us afterwards?
Do you want to come to those points? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan.
Thank you.
So yes, look, in terms of follow-ups, there's two stages. So there's a follow-up that management carry out, and they update their position in respect of the recommendations on an ongoing basis. And then there's an audit of that separately. So what you've got in front of you at the moment is the status in terms of the management update. We will the audit team will carry out a separate review, and I'm happy to present the findings back to the committee once we've done that.
Is that fine?
It's just as long as we're getting the full information, that's all.
That's fine. It's still initiated, that's there. Thank you so much. Councillor Dagidis.
Yeah, I've got some very fundamental concerns now about some of those, the progress of some of these issues. If I start with the very first one in the list about the meanwhile use and collocation use, one of the subjects that, in my opinion, and I might be wrong, is causing us to lose huge amounts of money wasting there. We've been asking for that for nearly 2 years now, constantly. Promises, promises, promises. Still is not, here it says initiated, still is not provided. I'm really surprised because this is the kind of thing that should be readily available as part of good management information as good housekeeping. So what is the explanation? Why does it take from 18th of January 2024 and since then again and again and again is in progress, is being graduated, this, that and the other. One of the issues that really are concerning a number of the councillors about how much money we probably are losing and how much social value we are losing by the way that we are handling these issues.
Thank you, Councillor Dagidis. Tyrone, do you want to come in? Let's answer this first.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for the question. And I note this recommendation comes right back from January 2024. What we committed to at the next committee meeting in March, so very similar to what I did with procurement last time, is that I would bring an all-encompassing report because there's a number of recommendations from internal audit reviews, but also outstanding actions on the action track. I'm going to bring a full and comprehensive report on commercial property to the March meeting. It just wasn't possible for here. There is some good progress made in that area. I know I speak about commercial property quite a bit, but we still have some way to go to really fully understand the commercial portfolio and in particular the income. But it is a priority, as you say, particularly it's quite a key income source, particularly for our financial sustainability. But I'll bring a full report to you in March of almost picking up, you know, all of the internal audit recommendations that have been previously raised, all of the actions in the action tracker. So you will get that update then.
Yeah, come back. Yeah.
I think, thank you. And I know that this is something you inherited, Darren. So I'm not really blaming any particular officer at this moment in time. But how on earth can we, as a large organization, operating without having readily available straight away this part of our estate, we use it this way, part of the other.
Hold on.
Sorry?
Ask the question. You don't need to.
No, that's the question. How
it's not helpful.
A well-managed organization doesn't have this basic management information at its fingertips.
I think that's noted, and we know that is something that we are addressing and will continue to address.
Go to the next one.
Okay, quick one.
Thank you very much. Right. Further down, we've got about the commercial property audit situation. Again, is the same situation. Why does it take such a long time for something very, very basic that should be available all the time? And we've been asking for it again and again. There is another issue. The audit of voids that already my colleague raised. The same thing. It shouldn't really be taking months to get that information. It should be available daily, every day, straight away there. I could go then all that kind of thing. And the last one is the declaration of interests, which we'll be discussing as well at the annual report. Again, why does it take months? We agree we want that. Why can't it be done straight away? We just tighten up and setting up clear rules, etc. I think there is some kind of slackness overall. That's what I'm trying to say.
The financial statement audit update and adult social care income collection. Can I now invite officers to introduce the report? Joe Becky Kerb, and Bev Winters. Is that right? Did I pronounce your names correctly?
It is actually Beatty, but I'll forgive you. Councillor.
Beatty. Oh, please accept my apologies. You can introduce your report.
Thank you. I'm actually going to hand over to my colleague Becky Cribb, who's the Head of Service for Commissioning, to give a brief overview of the report.
And also to add, Bev Winters can join us tonight. We also have Lulu Burhi, who is the service manager, and one of the teams that she covers on an operational day-to-day basis is the financial assessments team. So just in terms of introducing the report, so the financial assessment audit was finalised in December 2024. It did receive a limited assurance rating.
Sorry, if you can speak to the mic, it's quite hard for us to hear from. Yeah,
Is that better?
that's better.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll briefly set out a bit of the context for the service, the key issues identified through the audit, what we've done since then, and further work that's planned. Happy to take questions at the end. So in terms of the context of the service, the financial assessment team sit within the wider adult social care commissioning service. It's responsible for assessing what people can afford to contribute towards their adult social care support. So a critical part of the adult social care pathway, and critical in terms of income for the council. So the audit covered arrangements during 2024 and was largely based on case samples before July 2024. I think something worth pointing out or reminding people of is that this was very soon after the introduction of the new adult social care case management system and the finance system that accompanied that. So a lot of system change and process was still being embedded. We've made, as I'll go through, substantial progress with a majority of the recommendations either already completed or in progress, and the remainder are being integrated into the adult social care improvement plan. So just to summarise the issues identified by the audit, so in summary, they were limited routine reporting of financial assessment performance and adult social care debt to senior management, system and data quality issues across the case management system, the finance system, and also SAP, which is our wider finance and payment system. A sizable backlog of clients without receiving adult social care services, but without a completed financial assessment. Gaps in monitoring and follow-up, including unpaid invoices, and a small number of high priority legacy cases with significant historical debt. So in total, the audit made 23 recommendations, fell really into 4 categories: monitoring, reporting, policy and procedure, and individual cases. I'll just give a quick run through the progress under those 4 headings. And as an overview, as of January of this year, 30 of the recommendations have been completed in full, and 10 are in progress, so none have yet to be started. So within monitoring and evaluations, so what we've done is improve that oversight and assurance of financial assessment data. So, for example, financial assessment, performance metrics are now built into the Director of Adult Social Care's assurance reports, and there is regular oversight at senior level meetings. The backlog of financial assessments, open assessment, and financial reviews. A financial assessment needs to be reviewed each year. These are monitored routinely at a service level. And age debt reporting is now embedded between adult social care, finance, and corporate debt, and is monitored now under a newly established established since this audit, financial assessment and age debt board. In terms of reporting, really builds on the above. We now have routine reporting on things like residents receiving care without a financial assessment, the cost of those care packages, whether assessments are overdue or reviews have been completed, and things like time taken to complete assessments. In terms of policy and procedures, so we now have regular training on the finance system and on the care management system. We are in process of putting in place what we call a standard operating procedure for the pathway of financial assessments through to if any debt occurs, roles and responsibilities around recovering that debt. And we have planned for the next financial year a review of the statutory charging policy for adult social care. In terms of the fourth area, so those individual cases, of the 5 high priority cases identified by the audit, 3 are now complete and 2 remain in progress. I think the reason for that reflects the complexity of the cases. They are being worked on by our legal team, and some of them need to go through court of protection procedures. So debt cases under £1,000 and accruing are now being monitored more frequently to avoid the risk of further debt accruing. In terms of the backlog of financial assessment, so at the time of the audit, there was a backlog of 794 cases. That is now reduced to, as at the start of this year, 415. I would caveat that 288 of those have already started. In terms of income generation, our system's currently showing income of 15.4 million. We've adjusted that for various reasons to do with timing of assessments and system interface issues. And through that process, we're actually forecasting income of 13.2 million. Overall, adult social care debt has risen from the figure in the report of 10.7 million to 15.5 million at the end of December of last year, 2025. This reflects the completion of those that backlog of outstanding assessments and progression of several quite high value complex cases through legal and safeguarding routes. So in terms of the cases sitting or being worked by our legal team, we've now seen a growth in this area from 12 cases last financial year to 46 cases now being actively worked by legal colleagues. And that includes the high value cases that were flagged in the audit. Deferred payment agreements, which is a form of securing debt and is for people receiving care in care homes. Those numbers do remain low, but we do have a number in progress. They are being considered and going through that progress. We have better systems in place for identifying potential residents who would benefit from a deferred payment agreement. So we would expect to see those numbers increase, but we know we still have further work to do on the end-to-end process for putting those in place. We've put some additional resource not only into the financial assessment team, but also into the debt recovery team, and we've seen that is starting to have an impact, with approximately £340,000 of historic debt that has been recovered. And we also have a targeted project looking at 1,000 clients with aged debt. That total debt sits at 13.3 million. And to date, we've recovered 1.4 million. So in terms of what is still to be done, there's some kind of immediate actions that we're working through around putting in place that standard operating procedure across the financial assessment and debt pathway. Really being clear about the interfaces between adult social care, finance, and legal when we get into that debt space, and who is responsible for which parts of that process. We continue to data cleanse, and the additional capacity that we've brought in to the financial assessment team, and we will be bringing in some additional capacity will help us resolve those data cleansing issues. And obviously we will continue working on reducing backlogs and reducing wait times for financial assessments. In terms of medium-term actions, which we anticipate continuing into financial year 26-27. So it's the completion of those remaining high priority cases that are currently being looked at by our legal team. I've already spoken about the review of the charging policy, implementation of variable direct debits. That will be a major preventative control from debt accruing in the future, as we make it easier for residents to pay invoices. And we will continue to configure our systems and improve the interfaces between our case management system, our finance management system, and our payment systems. So that is where I will stop. I will happy to take questions.
Thank you so much for your report. So Councillor James.
Could you give an example of a complex case?
You want to switch on your mic, please?
Apologies. It's difficult to have a typical kind of example here, but they can include anything from there being kind of international bank accounts and properties involved, through to there being safeguarding concerns with residents that we need to address through routes like the Court of Protection before we can undertake any debt recovery actions.
Councillor Worrell.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask also about the legal and high risk cases, the 46. Obviously, it seems like it's grown quite significantly, and wonder if that trend is kind of likely to continue and whether there's like any sort of proactive stuff we can do to try to reverse that trend. And I also was just wanting to check, is it like internal, is it all dealt with by the internal legal team, or does some of this go on like external legal costs? Thanks.
Will be according to the amount of catch-up that we've done. So it's a bit of a disproportionately represented figure, as you'd imagine. However, I think the point you raise about how we engage with our legal team is really critical. And obviously, like every service within the council,
Councillor Brennan?
So I see that we've got rid of a lot of our backlog, and so we've got less people waiting. But what is the delay? What is the current delay now for getting these assessment? What sort of delay is there? And then I've got a second question I might ask at the same time. So the variable direct debit, which will help sort of like make people paying the accurate amount, is that actually already in action, or is that in progress? Or is it going to be actioned, or is it actually happening now? Thanks.
I did the first one. Okay. Tara can answer on variable direct debits. I might look to Lulu for specific numbers on this one, if I may. But again, that what we're seeing in our data, because we're still working through that backlog, is that we have seen an increase in the days people are waiting, or the time it's taking to complete. Because they kind of only count once they're completed. So you kind of see a surge. So we are seeing on a month-to-month basis, that number is coming down as we clear the backlog. Lulu, could you give a better sense of that? And also those coming through now, how long are they waiting?
Yeah, just as Becky said, we're seeing month to month that it is decreasing. So we're looking at about previously 200 days, and now we're looking at about just over 100 days. And month to month, ideally, we want to move towards a tighter timeline of about 4 weeks. And you asked what takes some of that time, and a lot of it is to do with non-engagement. And a lot of the work that we're trying to do currently is to support that engagement with residents right at the beginning of the process. And we're working really closely with our colleagues in social care just to make sure that we're doing what we can to support residents in this way, and to ensure that we're able to get people's contributions paid on time, and accurate financial assessments in place year to year.
Councillor Mace? Oh, you want to comment? Come in.
I'll just come in, Chair, on the variable direct debits. So the piece of work to introduce is underway. I wouldn't say it's early stages. It's probably taken quite a while to get going, but we have now got all the teams involved in the council that need to be, particularly led by digital colleagues, and kind of we're at the discovery. So it sounds quite an easy piece of work to do. We probably all pay variable direct debits, don't we, in our day to day? It's not quite as easy as it would appear. So, there are various system changes that we need to make, process changes, the links between the case management system and the finance system. So we're in the discovery stage. scoping out all of that, particularly kind of with digital colleagues. There will need to then be some communications with residents, you know, a change to, essentially it's an introduction of a move from probably a fixed term direct debit that some of them have got to a variable. But we know that there is significant evidence from other boroughs that allowing people to pay a direct debit that will vary from month to month, particularly if they've in receipt of home care, will improve income collection significantly. So in answer to your question, it has started, but we need to make sure that we do a proper discovery piece and it does get implemented properly. There is a number of systems involved. So hopefully we'll be coming back here soon and kind of updating you. But there is then a piece of quite a detailed piece of work to do with clients as well to notify them.
Okay. No. So I got Councillor Mason, then Diaguides. Councillor Mason.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the board. I can see that a lot is being done and you're dealing with a lot of complexity and a lot of complex issues, and that's quite clear in what you're saying. I just want to flip over and look at what's happening on the ground. So I have a bit of a tendency to do. The issues that we see, sure my fellow councillors will agree, is that quite often people will come to us with a lack of clarity about what's happened. And so trying to help them to unravel that is often quite problematic, because what we're doing is not saying we're taking a side, but what we're doing is trying to help the resident to understand what their predicament is and why. Some of that seems to be that the lack of clarity for the resident, who often have quite complex anyway, social or personal problems, that lack of clarity, particularly in getting something in writing, means that 2 years later or 3 years later, you've got an even greater jumble. And so undoing that becomes much more problematic. So what I'm looking at here is, yes, you're dealing with, I'm sure very ably, lots of complexity, but we've still got a resistance to creating that movement. As you clear, then there are still more backlogs, still other things coming in. You've got increased complexities, escalation. You recover some historic debt, and yet, out of 13 million, we've recovered 1 million, etc. So I know that you're dealing with lots of difficult stuff. What I'd really like to know is how we can best serve the people who are receiving adult social care. What is it that would change the picture, the story for them, so that they're clear about what the debt is, they're clear about why it's there, they're clear it's accumulating, and they're clear what their responsibilities are. And what I don't see when I see people is a clarity at each of those stages. And so if that was there, it would be easier for us to help the resident to work through what's happened, and for us to explain to them what their position is, instead of joining the group of people who've got a really muddled view of what's going on. And so my question is, how do we get to the position where we have that clarity right from the very beginning with the person who's receiving adult social care about the very complicated, ridiculous system that we're all living in? So taking that as read, and how do we make sure that they know what's happening and what they need to pay and why, and basically get that right for them?
Thank you, Councillor Mason. I think there are a couple of pieces to address here. I think the first one is about all good things in this space for me start with social work practice. I think we've got a huge undertaking in terms of workforce development to get assurance in that space, consistency of approach, because it's a conversation with a resident when, as you say, they're not necessarily in the calmest place in their life. and often are dealing with huge complexity and trauma. But I think the sooner you can have a respectful conversation with someone around the fact that they may well have to pay a contribution to their care and support, the better. And that would naturally start with anyone new to the service at an assessment, and to anyone known to the service at least at an annual review. So I think that's one thing. And I think how people have that conversation in a compassionate, caring and efficient way is a huge skill, and something that we don't need to assume that everybody's automatically got. Everybody needs a refresher about how that needs to be done, when it needs to be done, the timeliness of follow-up, etc. I think the other thing that's hugely encouraging for us in Haringey is we've got a very strong disabled people's organisation, Disability Action Haringey, who we're very proud to be involved in getting established, and they are pretty well established now and play a critical role supporting our residents, our disabled residents, and they are very keen to get into this space with us because, of course, if things don't go right, they often are the people that our residents go to and say, I don't understand what's happening here, I need some support. They've I'm saying this in every meeting I'm attending at the minute, but they've just won a couple of contracts, big contracts for information, advice and guidance. And so they're quite keen, given that they already work with us on direct payments in the borough, do a huge amount of work there, that they also support us in this joint endeavour about clarity as to what all residents, including disabled residents, may need to pay towards their care and support. And I think they'll be great for us as a service to work with, because they are fairly adversarial and challenging of the authority. First and foremost, their role is to support our disabled residents, and not to necessarily simply to work alongside adult social care. So that's two pieces. And I think the last one is really a bit of work that we've been doing for a long time, and we will be doing for a bit longer, is improving the information, advice and guidance we provide as a council, so that when residents get either on the website or they get paper copies of leaflets, as some people do prefer, lest we forget that the information, the tone, the language, the way in which we write to residents doesn't sound punitive. Because the whole issue around finance can put the fear of God in many, many people. And so I think the way in which we express what people might need to pay and what will happen if they don't is really important.
I guess just to add to what Joe's already said, there is also a lot of work happening currently to look at the end-to-end process, which does involve many teams. So debt recovery team, legal colleagues, financial assessment, and our adult social care social workers. And there's a lot of work now to just work together and understand the roles and responsibilities in each area. And we've already seen that this is helping establish how we should communicate with residents and improve their journey from end to end. And we're seeing improvements with this over time. And we hope as we continue within the project that we'll be able to sort of just improve not only the comms and guidance that is available through the website and letters that we send, but also how we're communicating when they approach us with queries and complex issues, regardless of where that telephone call goes to or email goes to, whichever team it goes to. So.
Thank you. Councillor Diaguides. You do not? Councillor Rossetti.
I would like to go back to the debt recovery, if I may, because I've seen that the addition of 2 officers for debt recovery has brought back. Can you still hear me? No. Okay. The mic is working, so okay. Yeah, okay. So 2 additional officers have helped recovering £340,000, and there is a note in the report that says that the previously unworked debt was due to resourcing gap. So I would like to understand if those 2 additional officers are here to stay, so they will continue this work. And also, realistically, how much of 13 million pounds of debts is recoverable, and if there is a plan to recover, because what I haven't seen in the report is a plan to recover this debt, because there is a lot about how the assessment will be carried out in the future. But looking backward, is there a plan, and by when, with a time scale, we assume that we can recover it? Thank you.
Okay, if I start, and then you might have something else that you want to include. So, so in terms of the staff, I think we recognised when we started this project, I should say, I kind of worked really closely with colleagues through the adult social care debt. We call it the Adult Social Care Debt Project and financial assessment. So that's my involvement kind of in this. When we started the project, we recognised that we needed additional capacity in all of the teams. So there is additional capacity that has gone into legal, into the financial assessments team, into the debt recovery team, and I believe into the frontline social care team. At the moment, it is kind of on a time limited basis, really, to understand the impact of that additional capacity. You know, kind of Becky has already highlighted as part of her intro, you know, there were a number of assessments that we needed to clear, so the waiting list was significantly higher. So we are working through that. So that additional resource will be in place for some time. We will then need to consider, I suppose, as a project, what our business as usual resource is. So, but until kind of Lulu's touched on the kind of end-to-end process and the improvements that we want to do in that space, you know, once we get to a what I would call business as usual position, we will then look at what is the capacity that we need within all of the teams, not just the financial assessment team. And like we say, we absolutely see this as almost a potentially a single customer journey. So it might have 4 different teams involved across the council, but for the resident, it's one process. So that's what we're trying to do. So kind of it's time limited, but we haven't necessarily set a time in terms of how long they will be here. But at the moment, we do know that we need that capacity, which kind of then links onto the second question that you've asked about how much of the 13 million debt is recoverable. So I should say there's probably three specific work streams, I think, linked to this project. One is around looking at the age debt. So exactly that, looking at kind of over 1,000 cases, looking at what is recoverable and then realistically what isn't. So we are working through that. Now that we've got the additional capacity, it requires to work through those cases requires input from all of those 4 teams to be able to take it forward. So I think we've now got the final capacity, and so we're working through those now to look at what is recoverable and what isn't. So I can't directly answer your question with a figure, but I can say to you that we're working through them very systematically, case by case. And I think, as highlighted in the introduction, every case is very different or can be very different. So, you know, some are quite easy to resolve, some of them aren't. So hopefully when we come back, if we come back and do another update, we will be able to update you on that. There is some debt that's quite old, and therefore, you know, we also have to be realistic about where we focus our attention and our resources about the debt that is recoverable and that isn't. So does that answer the 2 questions? Have I missed one?
Sort of, because what I understand is that until you don't have the capacity, then you will not be able to work out effectively how much of this debt will be recoverable, and therefore formulate a plan for what amount and how long it would take. Is correct?
No, absolutely, and that is the exact piece of work that is underway at the moment. So we're working through all of that 13 million to see what is. So it's quite a structured plan, but it does require working through case by case. That's why it's really difficult to give you a precise figure at this stage in terms of what's recoverable. But I think Becky in her introduction shared some figures where some of it is recoverable. So I wouldn't want the audit committee to think that none of it is recoverable. You know, we've got some clear evidence that it is, but I wouldn't like to give you a precise figure at this stage until we've worked through well, it's just over 1,000 cases that we're working through.
Okay. So if there's no other further questions, we have quite a lot to get through. If it's going to be a really quick one, because if we're going to start up another conversation, we're not going to be able to. If it's a quick one, please go ahead. If it's going to be like commentary, I said just email so we can email to the service.
You know, I don't do commentary. At the end of what you said, you said what happens if they don't pay. So what does happen if they don't pay? What makes a high value case? And residents get the care, and then we have to recover the monies. And while we do that through direct debit, that suits us, doesn't it, very much? And it's variable, but does it necessarily suit some of the residents? Because you know, sometimes they really feel that money go out, and if it's an extra tenner that week or whatever, could they set up a standing order and then work it out later? Yeah, they still have to pay, but standing order goes out exactly the same amount each month, and then if there's extra, they have to work it out at a later date.
Joe, like.
Thank you, Councillor.
Do you want the job, Councillor Rossetti?
Thank you, Councillor Rossetti. I think it's an excellent point, and it's something Disability Action Haringey raised already, is that some people, when they're managing their finances, would find the instability of that direct debit very, very stressful, which is why I think it's really important. I know we're looking at what's happened in the past, critical, but I think going forward, we need to do some sessions with residents, with our carers groups. We have reference groups through the Joint Partnership Board that work with residents with learning disabilities, with our older residents, physical disabilities, so on and so forth. And I think we actually need to do some serious full-on communication, so we understand in a little bit more depth as to what the impact would be for residents, and really push ourselves to be as person-centred as we can, because these aren't necessarily people that need another thing on top of everything else to give them stress. But I think going forward, I feel so much more positive, because if we start at the earliest stage to have a discussion and have a relationship around this piece, it will feel very, very different. We won't be on the back foot, and nor will the resident either.
The only thing I will add is there will always be a choice. So we know that, you know, some people would like to have that option of a variable direct debit because they know that their care package could vary from week to week. You know, they want to have that care package. They almost want to avoid getting into that position where they owe money. So actually, many will choose to have that variable direct debit. But I do think, you know, there will be that choice. And I think, you know, as Joe said, that communication and offering that option is really important.
We have to move on. Seriously, we have to move on. Thank you. So I'm going to read the recommendation. Is it going to be a quick one, Councillor?
Yeah, that's a quick one.
You had two questions that you asked.
Yeah, it could be quick. So I was just going to say that it was similar actually to what Councillor Jameson was saying. I'm slightly concerned by the fact that all these people who have built debt up and had all the care, whether they actually would be able to pay if that is a sort of element that slightly worries me. So it's just a statement. And it does rather seem to me that if you allow this standing order, having the standing order which pays exactly the same amount every month and you rectify it afterwards is exactly what we're doing already. So we're almost saying that we will allow that, but we will allow it. We'll allow the deviation, but we'll also allow them to do what they're doing already.
I would just say at the moment we don't have that variable direct debit option. So many of them will probably already be having variable direct debits, whether it's electricity or gas. So that, you know, many will be used to that. So you know, certainly our experience from other boroughs that do have it, actually quite a lot of people do welcome it, because it can almost go either way. It can help with budgeting and avoiding accumulating debt, but equally I absolutely can see where you're coming from in terms of having that set amount each month. But we would do that communication and we would do that engagement. It's just it's another payment option for individuals.
Thank you. Okay, so the recommendation for this report is number 1, to note the progress made against the financial statement audit recommendations as summarized in the report. Number 2, to note the update position on adult social care income collection and debt. Number 3, note the integration of audit actions within the ASC improvement plan and governance arrangements. Okay, so thank you so much, officers. Yeah, so you can go now, or you can stay if you wish to. So item number 8, which is the 2024-2025 statement of accounts, external auditors annual report. Can I now invite officers to introduce the report? Casey, Tim Cutler, and Josh Parkinson.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, members and colleagues. The reports before you now are our external auditors' reports to you, the committee. We have come very close to the end of the 2024-25 audits. So they've brought their findings in relation to our financial statements, the work they've been doing in relation to our financial statements to your attention. That includes recommendations as a result of issues arising during the audits, and also section on value for money work they've carried out. Before I hand over to them, I want to quickly point out the next things. As you will see in the recommendation, part of the recommendation is that the committee delegates to the chair and the corporate director of finance and resources the approval of the final statement of accounts and also the signing off of the letter of representations. So what's the next step? After today, after you've considered the points raised by the auditors, we have till the 27th of February to conclude the audits, sign it off, and publish on the website. So some of the issues, they've highlighted them in the report, some of the agreed amendments to the accounts. So we'll go back after they update the accounts, send it back to them, they will review, and once it's agreed, and once you have delegated that authority to the chair and section 151 officer, they will now sign it off before the 27th of February. I also want to quickly point out that there's a section here on pension funds. The pension fund account has been taken to PCB on the 22nd. So they've challenged all that and they're happy with the accounts, just to let you know that. But I will leave the lead partner team to talk about that during his presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Casey. Good evening, everyone. I recognise the members here, so you will be familiar with the two documents that you've got before you. Quick reminder, the two documents are an annual auditor's report. So this is the report that will sit on the authority's website alongside your audited accounts as assurance to the taxpayer, effectively, of how we've discharged our audit and the findings therein. I'll talk through that shortly. I'll then hand over to Josh to cover off the ISA 260 report. Whilst it's public on this agenda, that doesn't need to be posted separately on your website. That's a more detailed document which primarily focuses on the findings from the accounts audit. Now, I think we'll keep the presentations relatively brief because, of course, with the ISA 260 report, you received the draft version in November. So Josh will just highlight to you the changes since then, what's changed in the document, and in particular, just to draw attention to where we are concluding, what we've been able to conclude, what we've not. And then with the annual auditor's report, I will focus on the conclusions we've reached against the 6 risk areas I think we discussed in November. But again, I won't go through each of the issues in detail because I think all of you were attending the November meeting where we had a good discussion about them. Okay, so if I start with the annual auditor's report. So as I mentioned in November, we highlighted initially 6 areas where we had concerns or we thought there may be a risk to the arrangements in place. Again, quick reminder, for the purposes of this report, we are looking at the arrangements that were in place up to the 31st of March 25. And in our commentary, we try and reflect any of the recent developments that the authority have gone through to try and address those risks or weaknesses. So I'll go through each of those in turn, tell you where we've got to and any of the key points that I think you should know. So if I start with the big issue around financial sustainability. So just to step back for a second, this is our 2nd year of audit. Last year, we also raised significant weaknesses both on the budget setting process and also the cost saving process. As you can see in the commentary, that situation has deteriorated in the year, or at least the financial position has, hence the introduction of the resilience funding that's now being sought to underpin both the FY25-26 and shortly to be the FY27 budget positions. So we're again in a position where we are highlighting significant weaknesses, both on budget setting and cost saving. The key point I just want to bring out in presentation tonight is you will see on slide 5, and again later in the document, reference to the potential use of a statutory recommendation. Now, as an auditor, as a local auditor, we have certain powers available to us depending on the situation that presents itself at a local authority. Now, I am taking the view at this point in time that we will have raised that significant weakness on financial sustainability for 2 consecutive years. We've obviously raised another recommendation around the budget setting cost saving process in the current audit, and we are now going to look at what happens at the March budget meeting to see whether that financial gap will close or whether it continues to widen. And I think we've put some of the detail around the forecast position in the commentary in this report. So the comment I've made on slide 5 is to say, if at the March budget meeting, that financial position continues to deteriorate and the reliance on resilience funding continues to increase, we may exercise the statutory recommendation option. And what that means is we would raise a recommendation which the council will be forced to consider publicly and will be copied to the Secretary of State along with the council's response. And that's really meant to just accelerate and escalate the importance of this issue in our reporting, because if you've raised it as a significant weakness for 2 years running and the situation continues to deteriorate, clearly we have to take the next step, and that's what we're proposing at this point. So obviously we will reflect on what happens in that March meeting and then come back to you at a later meeting and confirm whether we've taken that step. I'm happy to pause at that point because I'm conscious there may well be just some questions on that particular issue. I'm happy to go on.
I think it might be related to that, the issue of the disclaimer, or are you going to address it later?
We'll cover that as part of the accounts audit, because
Okay.
that primarily links the ability to give assurance on the financial accounts as opposed to the broader financial sustainability position.
Okay, and then
I would just propose, I will go through all the other issues. I was just thinking if there's anything on the statutory recommendation point in particular, I will come back and talk through the other issues.
So the question is there any specific point about statutory recommendation that you want to ask Tim Cutler? Because we still yet to hear the reports, rest of the reports, okay? Is there any specific question about statutory recommendation?
Just basically.
Just before you, Councillor Dagilis, I had Councillor Mason, then I'll come to you.
Oh.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the statutory recommendation that I understand why you're framing that and what you're saying. What I want to know is what you'd expect from the council to do in response to that in order to avoid this situation.
Apologies, I'll get there. It's been driven by 2 main factors. Firstly, it's the level of savings. that are being approved and the sort of whether they are transformational in nature, whether they are more small level savings being achieved. But then you've also got the issue of the degree to which the agreed savings within the budget are also being delivered. So I think if you look at within the commentary, and I think part of the issue at the moment is you could point to the budget and say there's around 60 million of savings that have been identified, but actually a lot of those relate to the undelivered savings from the last 2 financial years. So you've got the ability to truly transform, and probably adult social care is a good example where you're looking to do that to really drive out those larger value savings. But then you've also got the sort of the management capacity capability to actually execute those plans when they are agreed.
Subsequent
Just a
question.
very quick follow-up to that.
Okay.
So what you're expecting is for management to look at how they can improve sufficiently to manage the situation of the savings, so that the savings are not currently meeting the standard that we would expect.
So I wouldn't want to put the onus solely on management, because I think, the first part of that was the degree to which some of the transformational savings are being approved. So I think that's why we're hinging it around observing what happens at the March budget process and then responding accordingly.
Councillor Diaguides.
Just a very naive question, but can you explain? This is a major threat to a certain extent. I don't remember having heard that threat in the past years, to be honest. So what exactly would be a statutory recommendation? What would involve? What is the threat to the borrower, to the authority? And secondly, I just want to clarify the reference to savings and focusing on savings. It could be interpreted simply at cutting services at this moment in time, or that kind of thing. That's the impression that people get basically immediately. But it could be stopping doing things that he wanted to do for the future, or vanity projects, or one kind or the other. That doesn't necessarily mean cutting services today or selling buildings today, that kind of thing. I'll just clarify that issue.
So a couple of parts to that question. I mean, firstly, I would hesitate to associate the word threat with statutory recommendation. I think what effectively our role as local auditors is to give assurance to the taxpayer. And actually what I'm saying as the auditor is there is a situation here which is deteriorating due to the increased reliance on resilience funding with which to balance your budget. Because, of course, it's not simply receiving money from government to close that budget gap. It is essentially creating a debt that will sit on the authority's balance sheet that will require servicing for the foreseeable future. So that is something that I think, as again, somebody responsible for assurance to the taxpayer, needs escalating and highlighting. So what the statutory recommendation will involve is a report from me to the council. It won't just be to the audit committee, and that's part of the escalation process. Obviously, the reporting I've done so far, while it sits in the annual auditor's report as a public document, it's largely been discussed and debated within this room. I think what we're saying is it needs to escalate to a higher level so that whether it's cabinet or full council, probably cabinet, would respond, and it will be their response, which is then publicly shared and will be copied to the Secretary of State. And the reason the Secretary of State gets involved at that point is it just gives that additional bit of oversight. And it probably joins up with dots a little bit with the resilience funding that you're applying for as well.
Councillor Diaguides, if you could speak to the mic.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't necessarily mean what bringing commissioners in or stopping the freedom of the council to write checks or whatever. It means simply that it could expose it publicly.
That is not in my remit. That is, all I can do is highlight an issue, and then it is up to other parties to decide on what the appropriate response is.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Brennan.
I think Councillor Diaguides has covered it, actually. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall I move on? Yep. Okay. So that covers the two issues around financial sustainability. Just very briefly, just sort of following up on where we got to with the other issues. Two of the issues you're quite familiar with by now because we've spoken about them a couple of times. Firstly, around commercial property, also around procurement. Those weaknesses remain whilst responses are in train. I think the pace of that response means we're not yet at a position where we believe that weakness has been removed. As you know, both those issues will, to some degree, linked to the procurement of systems to underpin that response. And again, the authority is working on that. We also raised a significant risk around temporary accommodation. We have dropped that as a risk. We've actually said in the commentary, we actually think the response from the authority is quite robust, and we're pleased with that response. So whilst it remains an issue, in a lot of that is market driven, and we're not convinced to a significant degree there's much more the authority could do to remove that risk. And then last but not least, we've raised a weakness this time around adult social care. So you'll recall we came in November and talked to you about that risk, and that hinged partly around the financial assessment. So it was a very timely response this evening. You've heard of that response that's in train already. Secondly, we focused on the regulatory feedback that you've received. And again, we're happy to say that the improvement plan process is again in train. So whilst we believe the weakness remains, and again, I draw attention to this point about our work focusing on the year to March 2025, we have brought out in the commentary the fact that the responses are well underway, and our recommendations are therefore more linked around the implementation of that improvement plan journey in particular, as well as some of the progress on financial assessments that you've heard about tonight. So again, when we come back to present our FY26 risk assessment for the following year, we'll properly assess that response and we'll decide whether or not it remains a risk or a weakness and keep it under review. That's all I was going to say around the VFM conclusion, but I'll pause again before we move on to the accounts if there's any further questions on those areas.
Is there any questions on VFM? Value for money? No. Go on.
Now, looking at what we've got in the commercial property field, and that we don't know what we have and how to value it and how to make the most from it. It sort of looks like we haven't got a suitable team, not in terms of the people not being competent that we've got, but would it be value for money to employ an outside body to, I don't know if they exist even, to take up that commercial portfolio, find out what we've got, see how we can maximise, and would that pay for itself?
I think that's going to be more expensive, but I'll leave Tyrone to answer that question.
So I suppose first of all, I think we do know our property estate now, commercial property, where we've got the challenges. We've got a number of leases and rents that need review, i.e. they were due for a review, X number of years ago. So, that is where the work is focused. And I think that has been picked up as part of the report by KPMG, the pace at which those reviews are being undertaken. There's a figure quoted. What I would say is that in terms of the team, so this was the position up until March 25, as Tim has said. Pace has picked up in the last certainly in the last 6 months or so. We are considering all options, I have to say. So no option is ruled out in terms of that additional capacity. So we know that we've got to do all of those reviews. You can either do it with a smaller amount of resource and take longer, or you can do it with a larger amount of resource and get through quicker. And so we are testing those options, including, would it be cost effective to bring in some external support to not necessarily replace an internal team, but to support the internal team, given the work that is still required. So, we want to get to a position where we know the portfolio, but we want to get to a position where all of our rent reviews and lease reviews are current, and then we can move forward almost in terms of business as usual. It's almost not that different to the conversation that we were having earlier around financial assessments. Actually put additional capacity in, to drive out the issues that you've got to get to then a steady state, and then you will look. So it isn't necessarily more expensive, but we need to test it for value for for money. There are a number of options. You could bring in somebody, an external organisation. You could bring in additional capacity internally. There were a number, so we're just testing that now. So I know that is a priority for the next 6 months, particularly linked to the update just done by Tim in terms of that statutory recommendation. Ensuring that we collect all the income that's due to us is going to be a really important indicator to improve our financial sustainability. So it hasn't been ruled out, Councillor Jameson. There are a number of different, we need to additional capacity. How we do that is under consideration.
Yeah.
So one of the updates for January 26 on the value for money recommendation, there is a comment, is on page 59, that says these savings might need to come in the form of assessing the level and quality of service provided in relation to statutory responsibilities, given that 80% of the service budget is spent on social care and temporary accommodation. So does it mean that, in the opinion of the auditors, we sort of need to be looking at doing more cuts and more saving? And is this the sort of response you're expecting in the budget? Because then I've noted on the statement of the account, sorry, the annual governance statement, one of the response from officers from December 25 is about looking at options to reshape how services are delivered, including statutory service. Work will commence in early 26 for review by the new administration in autumn 26. So is this the sort of process that this comment is recommending? Oh, yes, the comment is on page 59 and is the KPMG update as of January 2026. It's page 27 of the.
Yeah, I've got the comment. I think,
yeah.
well, I mean, I guess what we're saying there is if you are going to significantly increase the level of savings that you deliver, 80% of that total expenditure relates to those service lines. So you just cannot avoid those service lines to hope to close the financial gap. Essentially, I don't know if you'd agree with that, Taryn, but
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, as Tim has said, a large proportion of our budget does go on statutory services. I'm a believer that, you can deliver statutory services and outcomes in a number of different ways. So, from my perspective, I don't think we should not look at any service that we provide to make sure that it's being delivered in the most efficient and cost-effective way. And that includes our statutory services, particularly adults, children's and temporary accommodation, which we know are our big drivers for our cost pressures. We still do have statutory responsibilities that isn't changing, unless we suddenly get some reforms or changes in legislation. So we do still need to have to look at those statutory services and how we meet those responsibilities. But there are a number of different ways, and therefore, I wouldn't want any of us to think that those services are exempt from looking at the way we deliver them. Are we delivering them in the most cost efficient way? Are they good value for money for our taxpayers? Thanks.
Thank you, Taryn. So, Tim, you want to move on to the next one? Yes, Councillor Higgins. Value for money. Well, so we just heard the value for money bit. Now we're going to move on to the next one, which is the. Yes, correct.
I'm concerned about where we stand as regards the qualification of the accounts, first of all, questions of that nature. Secondly, about the projected here use of huge implications about the special finance arrangements and capitalization and all that kind of thing, So is that the time to the point in the meeting to raise this issue?
Sorry, Tim, can you please turn on your microphone, please?
Yes, we've concluded on VFM, I think now. So Josh will give you an update on the accounts audit, and then we'll take any questions on the nature of the opinion.
And thank you. So I'll just try and focus on the key areas and any changes since that draft report in November, and then happy to take any questions. So starting on page 6 of the ICT 60, which is 84 in this pack. So this gives you a summary of the key areas of work we've completed in 24-25. And when you look back at the same slide from last year's report, I think the message here from a financial statements point of view is actually quite positive in terms of how many of the areas we've been able to get through and how many different balances we're able to give full assurance over. So in terms of the areas we identified as significant risks, we've completed our work over the valuation of pension liabilities. We've completed our work over the significant risk on completeness of expenditure, and then we've partially completed our work over the valuation of land and buildings, specifically in that we've been able to give assurance over the other land and buildings caption in the property, plant and equipment note. We've also then listed some of the other larger captions where we've been able to get full assurance over. So we've got all of in-year income and expenditure, the loans and borrowings position, cash balances, debtors and creditors, and then the investment property balance. The ones we've highlighted in red are the ones where, as at when we drafted this report, we just had a few items still outstanding, which we've actually flagged on the next slide. But we are hopeful that we'll get those before the backstop date, and we'll be able to give full assurance over those before we sign. In fact, the income balance we've actually done in the last few days, so that one is no longer pending. We've also flagged on the right-hand side the areas that we've not been able to give assurance over. So we've listed here reserves, opening balances, the valuation of council dwellings, specifically within the land and buildings, IFRS 16 liabilities, and then the significant risk relating to management override of controls. We've also flagged some of the issues encountered during our audit work. And although we've put this, it is worth noting we do have a very good relationship with management, particularly with Torrin and Casey and in the finance team. I think the challenge has often been when requests are made of wider teams in terms of getting evidence back in a timely manner and in the right format. But we are already working with management to try and debrief on what we can do to improve for next year and beyond. So I'll just move on now to the slides that cover the significant risks specifically. So that's from page 87 in the pack, which is page 9 of our slide of our report. So the first one we cover is valuation of land and buildings. So as I've just said, we are able to give full assurance over the other land and buildings, which is around 1.2 billion net value. So that's good news in terms of our work completed. What we've not been able to give assurance over is the valuation of council dwellings, which are about 1.7 billion net value in the accounts. So although we've done work over the assumptions used by the valuer, Wilkes-Head and Eve, and found those to be balanced, we were not satisfied that the underlying information provided by the council to the valuer was accurate, specifically that the council dwelling properties were categorised correctly such that the valuer can then accurately group them for valuation purposes, as the valuer's got to rely on the information being correct because they can't go and physically value all of the just over 16,000 homes as part of the process. So the next significant risk over the next couple of slides is management override of controls. So we've got no changes to our conclusions here from what we presented in November. You'll see we've commented on a couple of recurring control deficiencies around journals and related parties, which again, I did flag at the last committee. So the next one, a couple of slides down, is the valuation of pension liabilities. Minimal change here from the November committee, other than just to update that we've now concluded our work over the disclosures, and we're satisfied with the valuation of the pension assets and the pension liabilities. And we concluded that the assumptions used to drive those estimates were balanced. And the final one is expenditure recognition. Again, no changes here from November, and we concluded this with no issues noted. So just continuing to focus on the key bits, I just jumped to page 112 in the pack, which will cover the misstatements we've identified. So first thing to point out here is we've got no uncorrected misstatements, which is great. So that's everything that we've identified, management have corrected. So we've not had any disagreements in terms of anything identified. We've got 2 financial misstatements, one relating to an error, which was actually Wilkes-Head and Eve's calculation error, in their formulas, which led to the overvaluation of an investment property. And then the second one was just due to the timing of the valuation being done in 2 tranches. So about half the properties were valued after the accounts were first published. So then there was an adjustment needed to update for the valuation post that draft. We've then listed a number of disclosure misstatements. I won't go into each one, but these have all been corrected across a wide range of areas. We've then just got a couple of newly identified control deficiencies over on the next couple of slides. The 2 new ones that I didn't raise at the November committee are on pages 114 and 115. Oh, sorry, just on 115. So number 2 and number 4 there. So we've got one around the, it's called debtors gross balance write-off. So that relates to the high level of gross debtors and gross bad debt provision on the balance sheet. So this is where we've identified that quite a large proportion of the gross debt is 100% written off, and you've got a good number of it as well that's significantly aged. So we recommend that this is cleared down so that you reduce the gross position of your gross debtors and then gross bad debt provision, just to give a more accurate picture rather than inflating the balance sheet on both sides. We've also then raised that 4th recommendation just around the quality of transaction listings, specifically the high number of debits and credits within the listings, which significantly increases the work that we have to do in trying to sanitize the population and taking out any reversing entries. And when we can't do that, it then has significantly increased the sample sizes that we've had to select, and then increases the work for management, and more likely that we have more challenge. So I think that's probably all I wanted to go through in terms of the sort of key areas and bits that had changed from the November report. But happy to take any questions on anything there or anything else anybody wanted to ask.
I have a question on the table on page 113 about the long-term debtors. And the comment here says that so far the council has only disclosed the net debtor position for its long-term debtors. And this omits a debt of £45 million to Alexandra Palace and Park Charitable Trust. Is this the only long-term debtor, or there are others that have not been highlighted due to the fact that it's only the net debt that is disclosed? Thanks.
Yeah, so the point here was that in the short-term debtors note, it's disclosed with a gross figure and then a bad debt provision and then a net figure, whereas the long-term debtors previously had been disclosed as just a net. And actually, when you look at the underlying information, there was a £45 million gross and then I think a £41 million provision, and then there was a net. The vast majority of that long-term debtor is that long-term debtor, so there isn't much else that we raised. Yeah, that's the only material bit.
Councillor Daigidis.
I'm just going to ask some very general questions. The first one for me is the very worrying issue, obviously, for everybody in the country, when you're saying the audited accounts will be qualified. Yeah, that kind of thing. What I want to know, I understand that there are special circumstances affecting all authorities of one kind or the other, all auditors, etc. In our case, are we on the average with the other, let's say, London authorities in that respect, or are we really one of the failures? Are there some London authorities that they don't have qualifications to their accounts at this moment in time? It's just as a councillor, without going to the details, that is the very first thing I wanted to ask. Can I separate that from the other 2 questions I've got here, and just come back for the second and third question? Thank you.
So, I mean, within the London Borough as a peer group, you've got a completely mixed bag. You've got a completely mixed bag of historical opinions given or not given. So yes, there are several London boroughs there who have never received a disclaimer. Their auditors kept their audits up to date without any modification. So they just continue with the normal annual audit process as they have before. You'll then have a number, and I don't have the figures. I mean, we work with probably half a dozen London boroughs. I think broadly half of those are unmodified, half of those were disclaimed for at least 1 year. And I think that final point is key, because when we're talking about an ability to restore assurance, ultimately, and remove that disclaimer, the number of years that you received a disclaimer is key to the level of materiality risk that we're going to experience in those reserves. So if I was to look across your peer group, you will be one of the more challenging authorities to remove that modification for, simply because the financial position you find yourself in, it's a lot more difficult to argue there isn't material risk to those reserve levels because they're so fundamental to your financial sustainability at the moment. But also you've got the number of disclaimers you received over a period of time. I don't know. I mean, officers may know the answers to this. I don't know if there are any other London boroughs with 3 disclaimed years. Possibly not. But that is where you find yourself. So the challenge now is to go on. Go on, Casey. Correct me.
I just said it's 2.
It's 2. Okay. So you're in a relatively small peer group. But the challenge is there for us to do that. And just to sort of build on a little bit on what Josh was saying, we need to get to a point where we can assure all of your closing balance sheet and your I&E, and then we can start to look back and rebuild, because we can't assure your reserve movements till we've got a fixed endpoint. And that's what we're really working towards at the moment. That's why the debrief going into FY26 will be so important.
Yeah, subsequent.
Thank you. The second one is one specific aspect about the reference to the pension fund and the superannuation fund to kind of like things. As I understand it, what we say here and what is in the general press, and most authorities now, local authorities, have shown a surplus for that particular year within their accounts, which is very welcome, etc. But somehow, because of some changes from Harrogate Council's own management, if you like, of the whole thing, something about doing with the caps, etc., that has, according to what I've seen here, if I understood it right, is turned into a deficit rather than a surplus, which, and I can't remember, is it page, right, it's somewhere on your summary report is clearly set up, which means that if we have any discretion on that kind of thing by the way that we choose some of the criteria for the valuations, etc., then that has implications on our budget deficits. And that's got knock-on implications on other things. Yeah, of course, yeah, that kind of thing. Is that the case? Do I understand it right? And if you can explain it a little bit clearer.
So it isn't, I think, true to say that whether or not your pension fund is in surplus or deficit can support you in your current position. It is essentially a decision on what level of contributions you're expected to make within any triennial period. And obviously what the pension fund custodians need to do is set those contribution levels at a prudent level, which protects the interests of the pension fund. The movements between surplus and deficit from year to year do not get taken into account in your operating position. You have a pension reserve which largely absorbs the impacts of that surplus or deficit, because that surplus deficit is largely driven by a variety of factors that don't impact you on a cash basis year to year. So it will be things like, whether it's the CPI assumptions that they use, some of the mortality figures that they use. They're very long range assumptions which won't necessarily drive your sort of I&E and cash position on any given period.
But obviously we understand you could not say the triennial evaluations will say that's how much you got to put in, all right? But then here we see as well that there is some element of probably discretion that is not exactly everybody using the same criteria on that evaluation, and that in the end, one way or the other, obviously, if the next triennial evaluation says you have to pay so many millions extra, then you have an account budget, which is taken by Taryn in her 5-year predictions. Yeah.
So I think you're probably referring to the slide in the IS260, which shows our view of some of the assumptions that are being made. Yeah. So all that's really saying is you've got 2 separate actuaries, one that's been appointed by the pension fund and one that's being appointed by KPMG, and we have in-house actuaries. And we're just saying that those views differ slightly, but none of them to any material degree. We're just basically saying that, say it's CPI, our assumption is a couple of decimal points different to their actuary, but it's within the reasonable range, so we're able to conclude. I mean, don't forget, you know, arguably the pension fund actuary has far more information at their disposal to make that assumption than we do. All we're doing is to confirm it's not materially wrong. So I wouldn't read prudency in those assumptions as prudency overall in the value of the fund.
Tyne, do you want to come into that point? Just 1 second, Councillor Aguilar.
I guess I was just going to kind of emphasise the point. So, you know, the pension fund is managed completely independently of the council. So the pension fund and the pension committee and board have that fiduciary duty to protect. And I know you know that, Councillor. In terms of timings, we have just gone through our triannual evaluation. Those assumptions were considered by pensions committee and board at their meeting in December. So we are going through that process now. You know, we absolutely, as Tim says, you know, we have our actuary, we take the advice of the actuary, they look at our liabilities, our assets, and make some recommendations around employer contributions. Now, we are just one employer out of, I think, 86 in the pension fund, but that is made completely independently by on the recommendation of the actuary and kind of recommendation to the pension committee and board. Thanks.
Councillor Davis, you want to ask your subsequent question?
No, so fine. The changes, in other words, are not substantial to worry about it, and nothing else. Okay, the issue that really, although this is this particular year's accounts, your commentary comes into the future years, the current situation as well, and all that kind of thing about the follow-ups. And when I look at the overall financials, balances, you know, the budget and statements and deficits and all that kind of thing, it's a bewildering picture, you know, for us as a council, trying to get our heads around week on week up and there, you know, how much, etc. And within that, the elephant is the AFS. Suddenly we got this thing that's within a few months snowballed from where we do 10 million pounds for 1 year or the kind of thing into now talking about hundreds of millions, that we need of it. And that is, to me, in my simplistic approach to it, is like sort of like borrowing, you know, against your family's silver, something that's going to cost you, make even bigger your deficit, and then ending up selling that family silver forever, you know, which has got tremendous political implications for people like me and the people I represent in the borough. So now if we start talking about 100-odd million pounds, and I'm just going to, whether it is the right thing to do. Value for money is as well about what you try to do, not only about whether the money, you know, balances, you know, that kind of thing. It's about the purpose, the political purpose. So if that was 100-odd million, from your own calculations here, would mean probably something like between 6 to 10 million pounds a year extra payments, you know, to our from our budget, increasing that kind of thing, plus other things that I won't go into the details, and it will end up in the end having to sell, let's say, all our properties in Station Road or something like this, because we will have no choice. You know, that kind of thing in the end, because it would be the only way to do it. So, yeah, I mean, is there anything whatsoever to say that we can really make a judgment on this thing, whether it is right or wrong, with your help, basically, about what the implications would be? I mean, otherwise, I feel that we are probably sleepwalking into a nightmare for the future council. Not for me, I will be resigning at the end of this term. But you know, for others, they will inherit a situation where they will have no choice but to move into a nightmare politically, from the political perspective, my political perspective, and the people I represent. So that kind of thing. I hope it might not sound very clear, but this bewildering thing up and down, and this over-reliance on EFS, I mean, is it the right thing to do?
I think all I can say in response to that is that's exactly why we've raised the statutory or proposing to raise a statutory recommendation in the first place, because we acknowledge that the position is not sustainable.
Yep. Thank you. Do you want to come in or just say a few words?
So look, we all know that exceptional financial support isn't sustainable, and I think you've picked up that, 10 million in 24-25, 37 million at least in the current year. We're about to finalise the budget. We're going to talk about the Treasury Management Strategy Statement after, and I'm expecting some questions to come up. It isn't sustainable. It's borrowing for the future, which is adding quite extortionate borrowing costs, not just the interest costs, but the minimum revenue provision, but over the next 20 years. And kind of we know ourselves from probably our own finances, the minute you start getting into debt, or it's very, very difficult, the level of reductions that we would need to make to not be reliant on exceptional financial support is quite significant. Now, we will do some work over the next 6 months and really understand that. And I think, that will, if a statutory recommendation does arise, then that will be our response. But it isn't sustainable. But unfortunately, it is the only option at the moment. We've had the fairer funding. We know that there is no further funding coming through from government. We know that what I would say is what is driving our financial position is the increase in the demand and the increase in the price. And we're just not getting the government funding. We've gone through, we've got the 3-year settlement now, small increase, but nowhere near the demand that we are likely to be seeing. And we know, perhaps our ability to generate income locally, don't get me wrong, we've got some areas that we need to improve on, and we've talked about property, we've kind of talked about adult social care, there'll be others. But our ability to generate significant amounts of income locally is much more limited than maybe some other boroughs can, not to name any. So, it isn't sustainable, but it is the only option. We need to assure ourselves that we're doing everything that we can, and we will do that, and our services are delivered in the most efficient way. But it's difficult for me to say to you at this stage whether it will be sufficient to be able to close our budget gaps over the next 5 years. And, you'll see the draft budget report on Monday when it gets published, but we've kind of shared some kind of forecasts around potential exceptional financial support in the Treasury Management report that you're going to see. But I can't disagree. It isn't sustainable, but unfortunately, it is the only option at the moment, apart from doing everything that we can to, make sure that we are delivering efficient services, for the people like yourself that live in the borough.
That raises some issues, serious issues.
What's the serious issue?
All right. The serious issue is that is the only way, and could not have been that the thing. Then what would have been the thing? Now, there are issues about not, for example, using our certain of our assets because we're waiting to sell them at some time in the future, that kind of thing, and losing millions, not hundreds of thousands, millions. That's one thing. Keeping low the expenditure on repairing empty flats or other things like this, that's costing us millions as well. Not, and I can go on paying for the rubbish collection rather than focusing on reducing the whole, the use, etc. That costs us millions as well. So there are other ways rather than simply selling the family silver. I mean, that as simply, which is going to cost us huge problems in the future.
Brief.
I'll be very, very brief. So in terms of asset disposal, so we have a disposal strategy. So good asset management is about disposing of surplus assets and investing in assets that we do need, regardless of our financial position, that is good asset management. So, our disposals do follow our disposal strategy that was agreed by Cabinet in June of last year. Now, exceptional financial support does come with significant costs, borrowing costs, and particularly when interest rates are still at kind of 5%, 5.5%, they're not down at 2%, you know, we do need to challenge ourselves hard about, are there assets that are surplus to our requirements and therefore would avoid the borrowing costs for the next 20 years. But I suppose I just wanted to give you that assurance that, you know, that is part of a structured programme and it is part of good asset management around looking at any surplus assets or assets that we potentially aren't using to its full potential. You know, we can't afford to we need to make the most of the assets that we've got, and kind of both operational and commercial, but we equally, like every council, can't be in a position where we're holding on to assets that aren't, you know, of a financial benefit to the council. So, you know, what we're not trying to do is dispose of significant number of assets that causes us problems later on down the line. We are applying just a very pragmatic asset management approach to our portfolio.
Thank you, Tara. Councillor Rossetti.
Just a quick clarification on the number of disclaimers so far. Is 2 including this one, or is 2 without this one?
So your previous auditors, BDO, delivered 3 successive disclaimers. I think they were the years FY21, 22 and 23. We've since delivered 2 disclaimers, 24 and 25, albeit we're on a journey to rebuild that assurance. So we know more about those 2 years. Clearly for the 3 years, which were disclaimed by BDO, I don't think any audit work was delivered for those periods other than the minimum required to deliver a disclaimer. So they will be the problematic years.
Thank you. Is there any further? Your report, son? No more questions on this? Okay, so I'll read the recommendation for this report. So the recommendation is number 1, that the committee consider the content of the report and any further oral updates given at the meeting by KPMG. Number 2, that the committee notes the audit findings report of the auditors, KPMG, and the management responses in the KPMG action plan contained within the report. Number 3, that the committee give the chair of the committee and the corporate director finance and resources section 151 officer authority to sign the letter of the representation of the auditor. Number 4, that the committee delegates the approval of the statement of accounts 2024-2025 subject to any final changes required by the conclusion of the audit to the chair and the corporate director of finance and resources section 151 officer. Have agreed? Thank you. Now we'll move on to item 9, draft Treasury Management Strategy Statement 2026-2027. Can I now invite officers to introduce the report? Sam Masters.
Let's go with this one. Okay.
Which requires local authorities to approve a Treasury Management Strategy Statement before the start of each financial year. So this report fulfills the Council's legal obligation under the Local Government Act 2003 to have regard to the Civil Code and produce a Treasury Management Strategy Statement. So the committee is asked to consider and comment on the proposed Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 26-27 and recommend it to full council for approval. Next, delegate to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the chair of the Audit Committee to agree any updates to the Treasury Management Strategy Statement before full council. So we're talking about sort of minor amendments that might need to be made prior to sending it to full council. And then to note that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at its meeting on the 19th of January 26 and the Cabinet member for Finance and Corporate Services have been consulted in preparation of the Treasury Management Strategy Statement. Thank you. So to give you some of the external context in which this report was produced, the Bank of England cut the base rate to 3.75% in December 25 as expected, with further reductions expected in calendar year 2026. Arlen Close, our Treasury advisors, expects the rate to reach 3.25% during the calendar year to the end of 26. This forecast reflects amendments made following the autumn budget and an assessment of the fiscal measures and their market implications following the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee meeting held on the 18th of December. Long-term gilt yields and therefore interest rates payable on long-term borrowing by the council are expected to remain broadly stable. So by that we mean despite the fact that the Bank of England rate is reducing, we do not expect to see long-term borrowing rates reducing in kind, although we expect to see volatility over the short term. Yields are likely to stay higher than in the pre-quantitative tightening era, reflecting the ongoing balance sheet reduction. So that is the balance sheet reduction by central government in terms of reducing how many gilts they have out on the market, and elevated bond issuance. So short-term fluctuations are expected to persist in response to the economic data release and geopolitical developments. PWLB rates, which are the main source of long-term borrowing for a local authority, are driven by gilt yields and not the Bank of England rate. So even with reductions in the base rate, gilt yields can and we do expect to remain stable or even rise as they react to other factors such as fiscal policy, inflation expectations, supply of government debt, or risk premiums demanded by the market. So to move on to the local context in which the report was drafted. As at the end of December, the council held £1.141 billion worth of borrowing and had £73.2 million of treasury investments. Details of this are set out in Annex B of the report. The council's capital programme and requirement for exceptional financial support are the principal drivers for the council's borrowing. Detailed plans around the capital programme and investment objectives are set out in the capital strategy and capital programme reports and are outside the scope of the Treasury Management Report. So Table 1 details. Table 1 details the current projected capital expenditure over the next 5 years, which in total is 2.910 billion, with 691 million for 26-27. Required 100 million of this being for EFS. However, we have revised that 100 million down, and perhaps do you want to come in here or?
If I just come in on that, so as you can see set out in the table that Sam has just talked through, we've made an assumption around future forecast for exceptional financial support. That is valued in this particular report at 100 million over the next kind of 5 years, which is the duration of the Treasury Management Strategy Statement. However, just wanted to bring to the committee's attention, so this report was pulled together probably about the first week of January, or kind of by, well, we're on it about 2 weeks ago. With any budget process, we are working right up until the 12th hour on finalising the figures for the draft budget for 26-27, of which will be published on Monday. Quite literally to the 12th hour, numbers are still moving because it's really important we get a most accurate budget as possible. As a result, the final Treasury Management Strategy Statement will show that 100 million has come down. And I today wrote to government to revise our application, which went in before Christmas. So you will see the final figures within the budget report on Monday, but that will come down not to 100 million, but to 90 million for 26-27. So just to say to the committee, we will update that figure. So the figures that you see, the 100 million for 26-27 was right at the time of this report. However, as part of finalising the budget, that has now reduced to 90, and that will be reflected in the final version that Councillor Dogan, we ask that you take to council.
So busy day tomorrow. So table 2 details how the so table 2 details how the council intends to finance that expenditure, with total borrowing over the 5 years expected to be 1.875 billion. So this is made up of general fund 226 million, EFS as it currently stands within those tables of 500 million, although that will be revised down slightly. HRA 1.149 billion, making up that 1.875 billion. For 2026, we're expecting 348 million pounds worth of borrowing in accordance with the capital scheme. So the underlying need to borrow for a local authority is driven by their capital financing requirement, which is essentially your capital scheme. The council's current approach is to keep borrowing levels below the capital financing requirement, utilising alternative types of financing such as grants, levies such as community infrastructure levy, etc., and internal borrowing. So these are balance sheet resources. So table 3 shows our capital financing requirement over the next 5 years, which is forecast to be 3.425 billion. So bear in mind that is adding, that figure is in addition to what we have already in prior years. So that's the gap between the 1.875 and the 3.4 billion, please. Of which 3.023 billion is expected to be funded by external borrowing. So if you look at table 3, you will see on the last column, you've got existing borrowing, which is of 773. So that's the amortized value, the expected amortized value of the existing borrowing. New borrowing of 1.647 million. EFS, I think totals at 603, given us that figure of 3023 billion. For 2026-27, these figures are budgeted to be overall 1.956 billion, funded by 1.552 of external borrowing. So that's new borrowing in addition to the existing borrowing that we currently have. So under SIPA's prudential code, a local authority's total borrowing should remain below its highest forecast for capital financing requirement over the next 3 years. And as shown in that table 3, the council expects to remain compliant through the medium-term financial strategy. The revenue impact of capital borrowing is referred to as the capital finance cost, and this covers both interest costs and minimum reserve provision. So minimum revenue provision is the charge that we make to the income statement to pay down that level of borrowing. It's a statutory charge to the revenue account that the council must make each year for past capital borrowing. Annex C of this report sets out the council's MRP policy statement for 26-27. This is the first year that we are including the MRP policy within the treasury management strategy. I think previously it had been in the capital strategy. Is that right? The code requires us as a minimum to report to committee twice a year, so that would be your mid-year and full year outturn. At Haringey, we opt to report each quarter, which is in excess of the minimum reporting requirements as demanded by the code. Part of the requirements for a treasury management strategy is a liability benchmark, and this is a fairly recent requirement. but it's an assessment of whether a local authority is over borrowed or under borrowed in relation to its capital financing requirement. And you will see from the graph contained within the strategy that we are largely aligned with the calculation as part of our liability benchmark. So other sources of finance. So typically the local authority, for long-term borrowing, the local authority will use borrowing from PWLB and perhaps other local authorities, but over the long term, it's generally the PWLB. The council also currently holds 50 million of LOBO borrowing. So this is lenders options, borrower options. At the end of last year, we had held about 100 million of these, 100 million exactly of these borrowings, which we were able to negotiate a favourable repayment term to the banks that currently held that debt with us. And we, throughout the medium term, we will seek to try and renegotiate the refinancing of those loans and the repayment at par. So table 7 then brings us on to borrowing limits. So are we all caught up on the sales? So table 7 details our authorized limit, but also our operational boundaries. So the authorized limit is the maximum statutory amount we are able to borrow. So the code requires us to set a limit which is affordable, and a breach of that is to be reported. Our operational boundary is set below that, and this is the level at which we would expect to maintain borrowing under, and a breach of that would be an internal control issue. So table 8 details our capital financing costs. So on table 8 we have MRP charges. So this is minimum revenue provision, and also our capital financing costs. Within this, we have for the first time this year provided a table showing the cost compared to our net revenue stream. You can see this is roughly around 20%, and it remains 20% over those years. Now, Tywin, I don't know if you want to speak to these ratios, but so the next table is table 9, which shows our financing costs as a percentage of net rents, which goes from 20% to 40%, and on the general fund, it maintains at 20%. Yeah.
So as Sam has said, this is the first year that we've included these two tables, almost a measure of kind of affordability. So a key indicator, both I suppose table 8 is in relation to the general fund, and table 9 is in terms of the HRA. So I mean, I won't say any more, I'm conscious of time, but I'm really happy to take any questions if there's anything after.
Yeah, so sure. I mean, so it should be, you know, these are large percentages of your revenue stream being focused towards servicing debts. Yep. And then table 12, which is the last table within the report, gives us our revenue costs of the debt. So that is the general fund, EFS. So if we look at EFS, it starts out 26, 27, 2 million, but escalates quickly up into 14 million. And then we can see those various different charges across the relevant areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Councillor Rossity, you had a question.
Yes, I would like to understand a bit better those tables, table 1, table 2, table 3 and 5 with respect to the EFS, because in all those tables, the EFS is quantified as 10 million, 54, and then 100 for 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. So the first question is, this is a forecast. So does it mean that the government might decide that maybe we do have the EFS for this year, but maybe we're not going to have it for 29, 30, and 31, or is it possible or not? So that's the first question. The second is on table 3, there is the last line. It says new borrowing to be raised for EFS 64, 166, 271, 379, 489, 603. So is this the amount of borrowing that we need to, is this the amount that we need to borrow to cover the EFS, or is the EFS itself? Because on table 5, those numbers are quoted as EFS borrowing. So it is the EFS that we're borrowing, or we are borrowing, sorry, to cover the EFS. It's just
So sorry, on table 3, yeah, so those are cumulative tables. So those are not new borrowing each year. So those are cumulative tables up to you get to 603. Yeah.
So this is the borrowing that we need to raise to cover the EFS.
If we were unable to close that budgetary gap and we were to rely on central government for EFS, that's what our borrowing position would be at the end of 2030, 2031. So those are cumulative tables. They are not additional asks each year. So we're not asking for 489 million in 29-30.
I'm not sure I follow, because
so,
here is defined new borrowing to be raised for EFS, and it's defined as EFS borrowing on table 5.
Yeah, sure. So the difference being, so if you might ask for X amount of borrowing each year, but then obviously you're making repayments back over that.
Yeah.
So your ask and the cumulative borrowing won't necessarily tally up in the same way, because you have to factor in how much you're repaying over those years also.
Yes, but those are the same numbers with 2 different labels on the column. So I'm trying to understand.
EFS borrowing, yeah, table 5.
So, do you want to comment?
Question, and then we'll kind of have a look at the other tables. So table 1 is the capital expenditure. So it's essentially not the borrowing, the total borrowing position associated with the exceptional financial support. So in answer to your first question, the 100 million, so I gave the update earlier on the 100 million assumed in 26-27. When you see the final version that goes on to council, that will now be 90. What we have done is we've made, I think it would be unrealistic to assume that we don't need any exceptional financial support in future years. And when you see the budget report tomorrow and the 5-year MTFS position, you will see that the numbers are quite significant. So we have made an assumption, because I think to assume nothing probably gives a false picture. And therefore we have assumed that 100 million will continue throughout the next 5 years. Now, what that does mean is that does assume that we will identify cost reductions, income savings in year to close in year budget gaps, but we are still going to have, if we are to use 100 million, we're still going to have that structural deficit that we will need to borrow every year. But it is an assumption and it is a forecast. I should say, when you apply for exceptional financial support, you only get 1 year's approval. So I wouldn't want the committee to think that this has been approved. Even 26-27, we haven't yet had a kind of response as to whether our application, but to not assume any use of exceptional financial support over the next 5 years, I think would give a very false position in terms of where we are on our levels of debt. So it is an assumption and we will review it every year. If I go on.
The assumption is also that the government will provide EFS in the next years. That's the underlying assumption. I understand that it would be unrealistic not to put here, but one of the assumptions is also that this EFS will be available from the government.
So we know that exceptional financial support will be available for the next 3 years. So we still have to apply every year. So it's not a given, but it's a facility that will be available to local authorities for the next 3 years, because we've just had our 3-year funding settlement and we know that exceptional financial support is an option. I have made an assumption for the following 2 years, but that's very unknown. The world could change significantly in the next 5 years, but to assume nothing, I think, would have given the committee an unrealistic position. So what I would absolutely stress, though, it is a forecast. It is, nothing has been approved, not even for 26-27. We don't hear about our application until mid-February after the final settlement. So we will revisit our assumptions every single year. Just to give you an example, in 24-25, we actually applied for 28 million of exceptional financial support. When we closed the accounts, we only needed 10. And so only 10 was formally agreed by government. So, you know, it is a working assumption, I must stress that, rather than actually that's what will happen. I should also say, sorry, Sam, just the last point from me is we have made an assumption in this Treasury Management Statement that all of exceptional financial support is funded by borrowing. However, because that is an assumption that we make, that may not be the reality. Partly because of the conversation we had, there could be further capital receipts through our normal disposals programme that we could utilise. But I would also stress that we do not borrow until we have to borrow. So this is a budgeted position if we had to borrow the whole 100 million. The reality of it is in year, we, you know, Sam and the team decide, you know, what balances we've got, what reserves we've got, and we only borrow when we absolutely need to. And, you know, you can see in the document that we hold a 40 million balance of cash, a 30 million, sorry, a 30 million balance of cash. So I just, you know, you have to make some assumptions when you set a budget and you set the strategy. As we go through the year and report the quarterly updates to you, we'll be able to give you an updated position on actual borrowing.
Thank you, Tara. So I've got Councillor Carlin wants to speak.
Just to reiterate what Taran has said, these are assumptions in the budget. However, certainly as Cabinet, we fully recognise that this is not sustainable for us to borrow and to continue borrowing at the levels that are in the current budget. And this is in the budget because we need to assume until we've done the work to reduce the level of borrowing, that's going to be the money that we need to borrow. However, that is not sustainable. You've heard it from our auditors, you've heard it from our officers, and certainly from the Cabinet as well. We fully recognise that this is not a sustainable position for us to be in. So the work needs to be done to reduce the level of borrowing generally, both across the capital in terms of what we need to borrow for EFS, which will be a combination of, as we've heard, delivering the savings, making sure that the resources that you've heard earlier this evening, both from adults in terms of resource that we need to put in, and that there's additional resource to put in capital, corporate property, etc., that services are resourced sufficiently to bring in money or make savings, and that needs to be done and done at speed, and that we need to be looking at everything to ensure, for example, in our capital program, that we are only going ahead, that we're only borrowing where it's absolutely necessary, that the schemes that and the capital that we need has to be that we need to do whatever we need to do urgently now, and that's the amount of money that we need. So everything needs to be focused on reducing that amount of borrowing, because what we have to do is look at a 3 to 5 year horizon and actually make sure that we are sustainable at a 3 to 5 year horizon, and and borrowing to get us to that point will mean that in 3 to 5 years' time, this is not sustainable at all. So I just want to say that is what we're looking at and urgently looking at, but that for the budget, until that work has been done, Taran has to make the assumptions that these gaps will be funded by additional borrowing, that the capital program will stay as it is, etc. But I am certainly looking at officers to ensure that that is not the position that we're in. Thank you.
Thank you,
Just to follow up on Councillor Carling has said. So
you know, the borrowing within the treasury management strategy is driven by that capital scheme. So we are essentially, you know, the capital scheme is as what it is, and we have to then match our borrowing to that. So unless the capital scheme is being addressed, you know, the capital scheme is what it is, and we have to adjust our borrowing strategy to match the financing of that capital scheme. So we don't have the leeway within our department to say, well, actually, we want the borrowing to be lower or whatever that might be. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Warren.
Thank you. This is probably a stupid question. I just find it so incredibly confusing. Just a further point of clarity on table 1. And obviously take the caveats about the fact that that EFS amount will probably reduce. When you're saying capital expenditure for EFS in, say, 27 will be 100, is that saying that's the amount we would have to spend in order to generate the capital receipts in order to...
That is saying the budgetary deficit, it would be such that we would need to borrow that money to plug that gap. So the structural deficit within your budget. So the inability, the gap between your income and your expenditure would be such that we would need to borrow that amount of money just to come back to zero. So, and this is on revenue, isn't it? So this is, you know, where your education costs, where your, you know, where that revenue costs come, and we are not collecting enough income to present a balanced budget. That's the borrowing that we need to plug that gap.
And can I just
Say,
can I
you want to come in?
yeah, can I just clarify, it's just on the general fund, so there is no exceptional financial support on the HRA, it is just the general fund.
Councillor Dagidis.
I think, yeah, I think first of all, can I just say that the officer made it very clear. What we see here is something that reflects what we need to do in order to follow what has been decided by the council in general in terms of capital programs, everything like this, etc. It's not really proposing anything of that nature, just simply saying that's how you finance it. All right. Obviously, the thing is the cabinet that decides these things. And I welcome the cabinet members' statement earlier on that more or less agrees with what seems to be coming from the whole discussion tonight, especially about that, yes, this EFS is not a good way to go ahead. Indeed, is one of the worst possible ways, according to my feeling. In that context, Chair, I would like to suggest, because we are the audit committee, we are supposed to be making recommendations, advising the full council, that we do advise strongly from here. We decide here, put it to vote if necessary, that we're asking the cabinet to drop any plans for huge increases in the EFS in the future years. If you look at this page 3 in particular, table 3 on page 137, a year ago, it would be completely different, the figures. Now, there is embedded into it a huge amount of EFS borrowing capitalization, effectively, with dire consequences for the public sector in the future. So, but only because it is existing there suddenly became the easy option. Just put it in there rather than actually look at what you want to spend the money on and all that kind of thing. I think that there are areas that we don't have to. I don't think that we need to spend the excessive huge amounts in Broadwater Farm now that have gone up to £200 million and £300 million, whatever we will end up. I don't think that we're controlling the capital expenditure in the civic center, etc. All that kind of thing. And I can go on. But what is requiring at the same time is really the problem. It is requiring that then we have to keep empty all these properties in order to sell them afterwards to pay for that huge debt, like all the River Park House, the underutilizing the pub across this and that, all that kind of thing, which could be generating money for us a lot, and we don't at the moment because we know we're going to have this huge thing. Therefore, we've got to keep them now, losing money now, for when it is possible to sell them in order to pay that. So I would suggest that we advise the cabinet to find different ways to say we don't after next year. All right, immediately we've got a crisis, we've got to plug it in, for this year. But all this 100 million next year, 100 the year after, 100 million the other year, etc. We got, let's say, take it out of your plans completely. Just let's. I don't know
what that will mean if you take out the EFS the plan.
So let's take 26-27 budget that will be published. If we don't have exceptional financial support, then we will not be able to set a balanced budget. We will not meet our statutory requirements to set a balanced budget, which is a requirement. So council will need to. So we would be violating our statutory requirements. So I think we are all saying the same thing, that except the use of it to balance the budget is just not sustainable. And I can't disagree with you, councillor. We've got to try and look at all different ways that we minimise it. I'm not going to say that we don't need it. We have to commit to looking at opportunities to minimise the amount that we need. I do think there is a different conversation around, particularly also with government. We know our funding settlement now for the next 3 years, a different conversation with government about, the root causes of the demand, the root causes of the increase in prices. Temporary accommodation, what we're paying for nightly paid, it's more than our worst case scenario when we set the budget. So, there is something about trying to address those root causes that is driving some of the pressures. Because until those, I have a statutory requirement to recommend a balanced budget, but equally the Director of Children's and the Director of Adults has statutory responsibilities to meet the needs of young people and adults. So it's a very, very, very difficult position that is, evident across the sector. The challenge that we've got is that we don't have the level of reserves that we can fall back on to kind of help us. Councillor Carlin talked about a 3-year plan. Realistically, we need to be focusing on prevention and early intervention to avoid some of the high costs. Well, that takes time. We haven't got reserves that will allow us to bide some of that time to do that more transformative work, and therefore we are reliant on exceptional financial support. So I can't disagree with you, councillor. We absolutely have to do everything we can to try and minimise it. I'm not going to say, I can't commit to you at this stage what that looks like, but I can commit to you that we will do that work.
So also
just once briefly
say that we do have a discretion to use the properties fully in, let's say, there in Station Road. We do have discretion to invest faster and turn around the empty flats, that we got at the moment, etc. We do. There are things that we not do. We do have a discretion to put more emphasis on recycling and rubbish reduction in order to cut £1 or £2 million from our levy there. We do have these alternatives, so it's not only either or. Now, I do appreciate that we can't do it immediately in 6 months, time, etc. So that's what I said, probably not next year, but basically not plan 100 million a year after, that kind of thing. So that probably should be the just say, well, yeah, you got to get over the hump now, but look, there are alternatives. And if there, which one do you prefer?
I think that recommendation you just literally made about looking at other alternative means for utilising to income generation, I think that's a really valid point, which we'll take that on board and we'll note that down. And I think those are the conversations that we've always been having, Councillor Diagidis, in this meeting, but also out of this meeting too. And I think I had my personal view with Tyrone about similar views about utilising our assets to income generate to bridge the gap. But I think we do need to have the EFS as a forecast. So I think that's really important in terms of the budget. Thank you. So I will now move on to Councillor Brennan, so you had a question.
Quite a quick one. So because housing revenue account and the general account are separate, and all this exceptional finance, is that going to affect how much house building we can do, or will it actually not really affect it?
So how will that affect how much housing delivery we can do? Yeah, I mean, the the issues around debt and how much debt we're taking on board. So the housing, the HRA is the principal driver of the debt. I mean, that is the largest amount of budgeted borrowing. And if the council was to reduce its borrowing and reduce its cost of finance, then it absolutely has to look at its housing delivery program and a reduction in that. And there's no sort of easy ways around that, I'm afraid. And Taryn, if you want to come.
Chair, I think it's really exceptional financial support is so the HRA and the general fund are completely separate accounts. The exceptional financial support and the borrowing costs and everything that we've talked about is all on the general fund. So the HRA is separate. It's actually Casey's gone, hasn't he? We're going to be reporting, so that will come and published on Monday as well. That will be in surplus. Now, look, there is always scope to look at improvements. I don't want us to think that the HRA shouldn't be looking at good value for money, etc. So, but the exceptional financial support is just on the general fund. So, we have to do due diligence on the HRA. That is tenants, that is a housing revenue account that is ring fenced for our tenants. We need to give our assurance that everything we're doing, both capital and revenue, is good value for money. But the exceptional financial support is absolutely for the general fund. So that doesn't have a direct impact on the house building that is happening in the HRA. But I would just caveat that though and say that when externally, when you look at our debt levels, it's looked at as a totality. So I was really clear in this report that I wanted to show it separately because, the debt levels in the HRA are driven because we are significantly investing in new homes and our existing stock. The debt levels on the capital programme in the general fund is because we're investing in schools and we're investing in roads. So there is a slightly different narrative around each one. And then you've got the debt level associated with exceptional financial support. So it is looked at a totality, it is high as a totality. But I think it's really important to look at each individually. So for instance, the HRA, the debt levels are high because we're investing, but then when you look at the 30-year business plan, you see actually that that makes the HRA much more financially viable, much more longer term because of the rents coming in. So it's not a simple answer to your question. It's not a straight yes or no. I would just say we need to commit to ourselves to look at absolutely everything, but the house building is within the HRA.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify on that. If we're looking at unsustainable levels of borrowing over the medium term, then absolutely housing is a part of that. But yes, absolutely what Tyrone was saying. Maybe I misunderstood the question. The EFS specifically relates to the general fund. Thank you.
Okay. So how you present your report? That's fine. So if there's no any further questions.
Questions from the committee? No.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. So I'll read the recommendation, which is number 1, to consider and comment on the proposed update Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 2026-2027 and to recommend it to the full council for approval. Number 2, delegate to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the chair of the Audit Committee authority to agree any updates to the Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 2026-2027 before full council for approval. Number 3, to note that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at its meeting on the 19th of January 2026 and the Cabinet Member of Finance and Corporate Services have been consulted in the preparation of the Treasury Management Strategy Statement. Agreed? Yep.
Just simply, and then that let's agree that we actually
Look for.
refer our serious concerns
Yep.
to the cabinet about the reliance of, or the appears over reliance on it, etc., and that we want the cabinet to here report on the potential alternatives to going down that route. You know, just so that we can have a discussion.
Sure.
Yeah. I
Yep.
mean, that's fair.
That's
Without
that's
recording
reasonable,
anything, but
Councillor.
you know, just make sure that's not just go.
Yeah, yeah.
go.
No, that's also included. Thank you so much. So we'll move on to the next item, which is item number 10, Treasury Management Quarter 2 Report 2025-2026. So it's you again, Sam, right?
So apologies to the committee. This report normally would have been fielded before Christmas. Unfortunately, that committee was cancelled. So this is actually the Q2 report, which is somewhat stale by this stage, but we'll present it anyway. So we just okay. So I look. In the interest of time and brevity, I am just going to cover the main areas. We will be presenting the Q3 report at the next committee review, and then obviously outturn, which would happen in the early part of the next financial year. But I'm going to make this very brief. So if you do have questions, please just interject wherever you feel. So table 4 gives us our outstanding position as at the end of September. So we had long-term borrowing of 1.021 billion, 1.021 billion, yeah, and short-term borrowing of 22 million. So that makes a total of 1.043 billion outstanding of borrowing. In terms of investments, we had 40 million. And that was 40 million cash and cash equivalents. So by cash and cash equivalents, we mean money market funds and money held within the bank. So those are funds that are instantly recallable. So table 6 then shows us our borrowing position. So of that borrowing, of that 1.043 borrowing, we had 971 million from the PWLB, the Public Works and Loan Boards. 50 million of that were from LOBOs, which we discussed earlier, and then 22 million of that being from our from other local authorities. You'll note the weighted average interest rate was 3.66%, well below what we had budgeted for in the prior year's Treasury Management Strategy of 5%. So we've talked about LOBOs before, but we are actively trying to engage with our counterparties on for LOBO loans to try and redeem these at par. Previous discussions with the outstanding 50 million of LOBOs, the banks had asked us to repay these at a considerable premium to their actual value on the market. So of course we've refused. Of our 40.7 million pounds worth of investments, we had 10 million at month end with the DMO at a rate of 3.95%, and then 30 million was with across 3 different market funds at 4.085% average weighted average. So next we get on to our performance ratios. So we have, so as at the end of September, our average credit score across our investment portfolio was 4.5% or A plus, and that was a bail-in exposure of 74%, an average rate of return across those investments of 4.05%. So if we next we get on to our metrics across Treasury. So well, actually, this is budgeted cost to actual cost. So as at the end of the first 6 months, we were at 5.7 million and 7.6 million on HRA. That gives us a total of 13.3 million. This is table 9. Against a budget of 22.35. The principal reason for that underspend on borrowing costs is the capital scheme not progressing as anticipated, as budgeted for at the previous Treasury management strategy. Section 8 then brings us on compliance. So we were compliant with all our metrics other than the PFI and finance leases, which we've discussed previously at committee, where we had an inappropriately low operational boundary and authorised limit, which was as a result of these limits at the time of setting the Treasury management strategy, not taking into account the changes for the IFRS 16 changes to reporting requirements. For the Treasury management strategy 26-27, we've just concluded a piece of work with our advisors, Arlen Close, and between today's committee and our submission to council, those limits will revise upward to an appropriate limit. So the operational boundary and authorised limit will be revised upwards. And then for all other metrics, we have complied with the limits and boundaries as set within the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Any questions? So before we move on to questions, because we are reaching towards 9:30, so I just need to ask the committee to suspend standing orders so we can hear the rest of the items on the agenda. So it's now 9:30 p.m. Can the committee agree to suspend the standing order 18 in order for the meeting to be concluded? Okay, so we need to go beyond. Okay, thank you so much. Agreed, right? Thank you. Thank you, Sam. So the questions, Councillor Brennan, and then I got Councillor Rossetti. Thank you.
Very short again. Am I dreaming, or has our credit rating gone up from A- to A+, or is that just... I'm looking at page 7. Page 7, way back when, or when I was previously looking at the this sort of figure in I'm sure I used to see that our credit rating was A- and most local authorities were A+, but now we're A+.
These are not an assessment of our own credit ratings. These are assessment of the counterparty's credit ratings.
Say again?
These are assessment of the counterparty's credit ratings. So we set a budget. We say, okay, we're only going to invest in something that's A+, AA+, or whatever it might be, and then within table 8, we report back to you on what the actual rating was for those investments.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so these are not the
it's not our.
They're not our county. Yeah, no, we don't report to our. For the most part, we don't care. Well, not that we don't care, but we don't report to our own credit ratings. So yes.
Yeah. No, I didn't think it was us rating ourselves. I thought other people were rating us.
No, these are our counterpart, and these ratings are provided by. So Arlen Close does a global rating of all the the entire local government sphere within the United Kingdom, and that's where we take those from. Thank you.
I have 2 questions, hopefully quick. So one is on the operating limits for this PFI and finance leases. And so my question is, how often do we revise those operating limits? Because it looks like, it looks like we're not compliant, we're going to revise the operating limit. So that's one question. The other question is about the interest rates for the PWLB. So I can see that they've increased mostly 10 years, 20 and 50 years. And if I read correctly, 9.7, so far we only have like 14% invested in loans for 10 years and 20 years. But going forward, this interest rate increase is going to impact us, I guess, if we decide to get loans with a maturity which is greater than 10 years, is it? Thanks.
Yes, sure. So remind me before. Oh, so what was the first question? Sorry, it was. Yeah. So apologies. So we will be revising it for this. For the version of the Treasury Management Strategy statement that we fielded today, that will be revised for the version that goes to committee. So there's been quite a lengthy work around IFRS 16 and minimum revenue provision that Ireland Close has undertaken. It's actually been 3 chances of work. Every time we thought we were sort of getting close, we understood actually there was some more work to do. So that's only been concluded in the last couple of weeks. So that will be the Treasury Management Strategy will be updated between this evening and the version that goes to cabinet. In terms of the
Yeah, but my question is, do we do this often when we find ourselves not be within those operating limits? Or is this is an exceptional revision?
So this is exceptional because this was the breach was brought around by a change in reporting requirement, by a change in accounting legislation, essentially. So outside of that, you would not expect we would expect the figures that we budget for in the strategy to encompass all of those requirements. This was a new reporting requirement, and unfortunately, so it was optional about which year you would implement those requirements, and it wasn't clear which year we were going to, and so unfortunately we've slightly misaligned setting our boundaries with the implementation of that legislation. So yeah, fine. And so in terms of and the next question was around maturity structure, is that correct? Which table was that, please? 6.9. 6.9. 6.9.
Section 9.6.
9.6. So yeah.
Page 177.
Yeah. So what we are seeing. So there's been a contraction in the. So the PWLB rates are essentially driven by gilt yields. And what we've seen as central government has sought to reduce its own cost of borrowing, essentially what it has done, because of uncertainty around long-term rates, it has reduced the supply of long duration gilts within the market. So that means that the gilts that remain in the market are achieving a higher than anticipated return because of contraction of supply and then an increase in demand. And so that's why we see those long-term duration gilts stubbornly higher, and that's what drives our long-term borrowing costs. So yeah. Yeah, so this is why, so within our team, we've been, you know, there's a certain amount of uncertainty, but we've been opting to go for those lower durations, you know, those sort of 10-year. So, and this is in conjunction with Ireland Close. So they've been inviting us, you know, go for those 10-year equal installment loans from PWLB, because those rates, because that what we've just discussed is not baked into those rates. Actually, those are more efficient. Those are better costs for local authorities. So we have not been purchasing those 30 to 40 to 50-year PWLB loans.
And so the strategy going forward is also to keep investing in short terms rather than long terms, 10, 20, 50 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Currently at the moment, but it's, you know, we have regular update meetings with our advisors, and we take it from month to month what's the appropriate strategy. So you know, it may be that it entirely depends on those market conditions. You know, what's appropriate in April 26 might not be appropriate by the time you get to July 26. So but that's why we have that continuous dialogue with our advisors, Ireland Close. Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions on this item? No. So I'll read out the recommendation. So the recommendation for this report is to note the Treasury management activity undertaken during the financial year to 30th of September 2025 and the performance achieved, which is attached as Appendix 1 to this report. Number 2, to note all the Treasury activity were undertaken in line with the approved Treasury management strategy. Thank you, Sam. So now we'll move on to item 11, which is internal audit progress report. Can I now invite officers to introduce the report? Minesh, Johnny.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I'll do a quick introduction to this paper. It's my usual paper to you outlining the work of internal audit for the period September to December 2025. There are three main sections, so I'll just quickly talk through each one. In terms of the work that the internal audit team is doing, to the end of December, the audit team had delivered about 50% of the plan. A lot of the audits are back-ended, and we heard from Mazars at the last meeting, who have confirmed that and given us assurances that the work will be completed by the end of March. So that's the first part. The second part is you will see that in my table in the paper, I've given some statistics about the number of priority 1 recommendations and the status of the implementation of those recommendations. I'm pleased to report to the committee that from the last time, a further 8 priority 1 recommendations have been implemented, and now there remains 20 P1 recommendations that we are still following up. And the final bit is in terms of the work that was completed, there were 4 audits completed. 2 were assigned adequate assurance and 2 were assigned limited assurance. The adequate assurance is related to sickness absence and fire risk assessments. And the limited assurance is related to managing housing benefit overpayments and the management and use of waivers. Chair, I'll pause and take any questions at this point.
Thank you, Manish. Questions for Manish? Councillor Worrell?
It was just about some of the older outstanding recommendations and whether it's a concern that there are still some priority 1 recommendations lingering from 2023 and 2024. And yeah, what's kind of being done to chase that up?
Thank you, Councillor. So in the main, the outstanding recommendations relate to the value for money opinions that we've heard from external audit, and are essentially those recommendations which will take time to implement just because of the nature of the recommendations themselves. And they essentially fall into the 2 broad areas, procurement and commercial property.
Yeah, it was just an additional thing. On page 183, yeah, you mentioned that there's a priority 1 recommendation due for implementation by the end of this month. That's just in the penultimate paragraph on the page. Is that kind of on course to be complete?
I actually do all of the tracking of the audit recommendations at the moment within the business and track these. So part of that is setting a revised timeline with management, and the ones that we've set that are like February or March now are ones where we have actually been quite realistic and said, you know, let's not keep having the same discussion, but let's set something. And so I am in the process at the moment of going back to management, and as Manish said earlier, the follow-up process is twofold. We try to make it more efficient by getting an indication from management and an update, and then we will independently audit. If it's a new control, we will test that control has embedded and we can see it's working. For the financial assessments, the discussion earlier, Lulu there tracks all their audit recommendations. I've got access to that. I can see it as a live document. Housing's the same. I can go in at any point in time and look at where they are with their actions, and then as part of their management team meetings, they're discussing that, you know, in that environment as well. So it is visible to us. It's been quite a lot of work. We had a bit of a backlog of where things weren't done the way they should be done, but the culture has shifted. We're seeing in-year actions being closed off. We have got some legacy ones. What I try to do though is look at the risk. So sometimes the black and white recommendation, management will hang on to it. And so why I've got involved is we go back to the risk, like why did we raise this? What's changed since, and what are we doing now? So some sort of drop off more naturally because the world's moved on and the risk is now different and it's managed, and that action will never be fully complete, but we're satisfied with the situation. Some things move on because
the risk does change completely. And in some areas, we go back and do an audit. So the old recommendations drop off and we refresh and they're superseded. So there's sort of it is now within the council much more of a live conversation. So yeah, hopefully that reassures. I am working on an actual tangible document, which will, but a lot of the cleansing of the old needed to happen before we could have something meaningful to share. But yeah, it's work, and I think the end of this year will be a really good position statement to share.
Thank you. It was just, I was mentioning also the specific one, which is in relation to housing benefit overpayments and just whether that was complete, because it was due by the end of this month, I think.
Councillor, if you wouldn't mind, let me go back to the service and ask that question, and I'll come back to you by an email.
Thank you. So, Councillor Sue Jameson.
I mean, I was going to ask something about the housing benefit overpayments because I sort of wanted to work out how come we end up overpaying. I don't know how that sort of happens in the first place, and then we've got to get it back. And then the other thing I wanted to ask was the 3 priority 1 recommendations outstanding relate to the council's use of the council's dynamic purchasing system, complaints management, and the payroll. Didn't we attempt a new computer system? And what's the situation as regards that? Doesn't that relate to and our purchasing system? How are we getting on with that? Basically.
Let me start with the first question, which is really how we end up with a housing benefit overpayment.
Yeah, how do we end up with 15 million?
So essentially, the way the system works is that people who claim housing benefit are provided with a benefit. If there is a change of circumstance, people then report those circumstances back to the authority, and we have a certain time frame within which we have to make the change. If we don't make the change quickly enough, there will be an overpayment potentially of housing benefit. The DWP have very strict criteria for determining whose fault it is that the overpayments occurred. And if they attribute the fault to the local authority, and if that fault exceeds a small threshold, a very small percentage, then they basically reduce the amount of subsidy they give to the authority, resulting in a financial loss to us. That's essentially how the system works. So there are lots of moving parts here, and to make sure that we minimize any potential loss to us and to minimize the housing benefit overpayment, we need to act very quickly as soon as we become aware of a change of circumstance.
I mean, in relation to the systems.
Yeah, so actually there's a couple of references to systems, isn't there? So in terms of the e-procurement system, so the replacement of a HCPS that we have at the moment. So we've done a previous, when I brought the report to the last committee giving the update on procurement, we are now, aside from that, we are also replacing our finance and HR systems, and therefore we are incorporating whether a single system can now also meet the needs of kind of our procurement requirements. We don't know the answer to that. We're in the discovery stage, but it is being picked up as part of that wider project. In terms of the replacement of because there's reference to SAP, in terms of payroll, in terms of where we are at the moment. So our current system, so it covers finance, payroll, HR, and kind of payments, kind of some purchasing and procurement activity. It's currently quite old. It needs replacing. Do nothing is not an option. So we have very actively started on that programme. We are working up towards bringing a cabinet decision probably in June sort of time. So we're doing the business case development at the moment. there are a number of different options at the table. Do nothing, which I don't think is a real option, but you have to always include it in options appraisal. And there are a range of others. So that will come forward as we're doing what we call the discovery stage, which is essentially getting us to business case. It's not an easy project. It's not an easy system replacement. It requires not just system, but also significant change in the way we do things across the organisation. And I think actually a number of the recommendations refers to the need for a new system. Implementation is probably 2.5 years away in reality. So the project, and that's just the length of time that it takes. So it's a very active programme now. I think Audit Committee will want some regular updates over the next kind of couple of years in terms of that particular project. I know it's part of the audit plan, but it's quite common for audit committees to also get regular updates as well. So it's started, but it's early stages. We're working towards business case and cabinet decision later in the year. Yeah.
Thank you, Tyrone. So I got Councillor Rossetti next.
The question is still on the housing benefit overpayment. Here there is a comment in the auditor's opinion. A root cause here is a lack of clear prioritization of debt levels and focus on action to clear debts. So I was wondering, in this case, therefore, we do have the capacity to make these updates in time, and it's only a question of how the priorities are set. Is correct, or we also have to look at the capacity in terms of staffing to make sure that we are quick enough to catch up with the updates and not be penalized by these overpayments.
Thank you, Councillor. In my view, I think it's a bit of both. Yes, there is always a matter of prioritizing all the different functions that you have and trying to pick the most important at a point in time. But I think there is a little bit of a capacity issue here as well. One of the strange things about the change of circumstances is that they're not always predictable and they don't always come in a sort of in a straight line. So there'll be peaks and troughs. I guess really for the service, what they have to try to do is anticipate and try to manage the change as basically as soon as they can happen to a level that is comfortable for the authority. We had some issues around housing benefit overpayments many years ago. And one of the things that the authority was able to do was get an external provider to support the management of the housing benefit system, as such that actually we minimize the potential for any errors to creep in the longer term. I'm not quite sure if that's still in place, but that I'm happy to go back and just ask that question. But in summary, I think it's a bit of both. I think there is a capacity issue. Yeah.
You don't go into the specific of what the recommendations are. So I was wondering if part of it was about resources, but also I guess this is one of the things where a lot of fraud is also possible. So that would also be part of the anti-fraud activities in a way, I guess.
It is, but so in 2016, Haringey lost the power to investigate housing benefit fraud, and that's now completely DWP, Department for Work and Pensions. We have no powers to investigate any housing benefit fraud, and they'll be regularly refer any that come across our desk to the DWP.
Thank you, Manish. Yeah, I got Councillor Dagies. Don't worry, it's fine. I will never forget you, Councillor Dagies. You're on my list. Please ask your question. Thank you.
Look, the two issues that you highlighted in the main report, where there is the limited assurance, are the important ones in my view. But, well, they're all important, but these are very, very important. The first one already referred to housing benefit overpayments. Now, it's important to stress here, this committee took an initiative 3 years ago, to clear the backlogs, because the main point was the backlogs themselves were creating all these delays and the mess and everything. And the cost to the authority was huge. You outlined very briefly that some of it is got to do with not getting back from the government, being penalized because of some of the payments being a thing. And there are leeways, etc. What I want to know is, since then, we found out that we said we have some extra resources, clear the backlogs, then we monitor for a while, they've got sufficient resources. You remember, you were bringing to that committee every 3 months to say, are you still all right on top of it, etc. So it's slipped back. And I want to know really whether now we've reached the stage we don't have backlogs and we've got a sufficient number of people, because the implications on our budget are quite substantial and could run into millions actually every time. And you said already that you will see about the number one recommendation, the priority one, that by 29th of this month, we should know whether it's been met, at least that. I don't know whether they are adequate, the findings there, but nevertheless, at least what the funds should be done. Management of the use of contract waivers, the next one, which again limited assurance. This, in my opinion and my experience, is one of the biggest problems that we lose money. The thing that the waivers should have been by exception only, and they almost became a way of life, basically, like ignoring completely the main standard things. And that is the reason why a lot of councillors were asking for that audit here. And that because otherwise they reduce accountability. You know, it creates all kinds of opportunities, etc. Are not here. Two, number one, priority one recommendations, although the things, the priority one recommendations due for implementation by end of January 26. I'd like to know whether at least these two priority one have been implemented according to the proposal here. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll need to ask the service to give an update on both areas,
Yeah.
and I'll email the committee with the update.
Thank you. Okay. We have three more items. Just email it to us and we'll, because there's officers will need to catch trains and so forth. So we got quite a lot. Thank you. So, okay, so the recommendation for this report is to note the audit coverage and follow-up work complete. Yep. So I'll move on to the next item, which is the Anti-Fraud, Bribery and Corruption Progress Report, Q3, 2025-2026. Yep, and it's Vanessa Bateman.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report all the councillors are familiar with. So I will take it as read and literally just pull out maybe the top 5 messages that I think maybe I was trying to articulate. So relates to Q3, the detail starts on page 206 of your pack. The proactive work for the period was really around temporary accommodation and the National Fraud Initiative exercise. We've got a number of other proactive projects on the go, which I'll reassess and refresh as we plan for the new financial year. Page 208, in our KPIs, we had a really great spike in our recoveries this quarter. Lots of reasons for that. Some very old cases concluded, some cleansing work identified that we didn't know about, some outcomes that we needed to know about. And then the most positive one for me is that we are really starting to see some of the improvements in the housing processes and things happening much quicker. So the cases are moving through the processes and we're getting to the recovery much more efficiently. Still have a really high caseload. We have recruited some additional temporary resources for Q4 because we did have a backlog of cases. So that team member joined last week and is already up and running. She's very experienced and she's going to help us get to a point where we can start the new year and on a little bit of more of an even keel so we can work a bit more efficiently. Blue Badge, just wanted to flag that the automation that we've been waiting for is finally, the project is underway and we've got a specification for how to automate that. At the bottom of page 211 and then onto page 212, employee cases and the dual worker cases, which have been really high in prior periods, have sort of tailed off and become manageable. But we did receive 7 new whistleblower referrals, and they all fit under the policy, so we've accepted all of them. So we have got like 7 investigations like at the preliminary stage to work out where they will go, whether that will be audit or fraud that pick those up, and then I'll allocate resources. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions? Can I have that 1 or 2 and concise, because okay, thank you. Not like
But I can't
All right.
resist saying it. Page 207 at the bottom, anti-productivity, the calculations again and updating the amount of value of recovering one council flat. Effectively there. Now there is gone up to £78,000 per unit.
Yeah.
I think that is important, and I think we all should remember it. It's not applicable only on the fraud side, but it's on other things, like, for example, delays in repairing flats and put them back to use, or keeping them empty properties, or demolishing flats, all that kind of thing, what we lose. So I think it is worth remembering. The figures are huge. What we lose, it was never been taken into account in calculations, should really always be there. Thank you.
What I'm going to do is say how pleased I am really to see, if I've understood, I did hear what you said, and I thought that was the case. 45 properties recovered. That's really, really, really good. So have you got more staff, or is it just things have just speeded up?
We have got more staff since Q3. We actually, because we'd got a backlog of cases, we'd actually worked up a bit of a business case to have some additional resources. So I've got more dedicated housing resources for Q4 and starting into next year than we've had for a long time. So yes, we have. These are very much historical cases that I think probably I'm really pleased that the recovery's banked in Q3. If I'm very honest, we probably should have had them in prior periods, but we have recovered them now. And then obviously there's the challenge that they have to be put back in a condition ready to be let again. But
okay, so the recommendation for this report, it's the audit committee is recommending to note the activities of the team during the Q3 2025-2026. I'm just going to make a recommendation because of the time. So I would like to ask the committee whether you will be agreed to defer item 30, which is the annual governance statement updates, and the risk management update, corporate risk, for the next meeting, which is in March. So we can hear the private part of the meeting. So we have to agree one item at a time. So my recommendation is to defer item 13, annual governance statement update report 2024-2025. Are we agreed on that? To the March meeting? And I'm also proposing to defer the risk management update, corporate risk register, for the March meeting. Yep, so we can hear the. Okay, thank you so much. Right, if there's no other further business, we'll move on to the private part of the meeting. Can I ask the members to stay? Thank you.